All right, we've got a lot to talk about. There was something about a Chinese operative. I want to get into this a little bit. It just broke today, and I was looking at some of the articles about it earlier. We've got someone who was working in the state. I guess it was an aide for Cuomo, and then even Kathy Hochul, governor of New York. I believe in the Department of Labor most recently. They're saying that she is being indicted along with her husband for working with the Chinese government. It seems like, according to the indictment, the husband had business in China and he was given business allegedly by China to the tune of millions of dollars. They're talking about a condo in Hawaii, I believe, and a multi-million-dollar house in Long Island, and a 2024 Ferrari, and all these expensive purchases that this couple was able to make, allegedly because she was working on the inside of New York state government and aiding China, right? And in return, I guess, the Chinese government allegedly provided gifts to her and business to her husband, which was quite lucrative, according to all this. So kind of a concerning situation, right? That you had someone
Yeah.
allegedly working at high levels of New York's government who was an agent of the Chinese government. And again, this is all alleged because this is an indictment, right? This
Right.
just came down, so this hasn't been proven in court or anything yet. So we want to make that clear. But just the fact that this is being talked about, right? That this indictment was made and these allegations are out there, is pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy. Apparently, she worked to stop officials in New York, such as the governor, from meeting with Taiwanese officials, I believe officials from Taipei, they said, on
Right.
behalf of the Chinese government.
Yeah. Because China has their thing against Taiwan not being
Right.
uh an independent country, but being a rebel state of their country.
Yeah.
And it's a little off topic, but that's always kind of it's always kind of been strange to me how the rest of the world goes along with that idea, like sits in that limbo of we don't really agree, but we're going to not say it or whatnot. They won't acknowledge Taiwan, even though Taiwan's been a country for how many decades now?
Yeah.
And
It seems
and
like one of those things where they just kind of want to leave it alone for the purpose of not causing any controversy or drama over it. So they just kind of
yeah,
with it. They just feel like it's not a battle worth fighting. That's the sense I get from it. Like a lot of people just think, what's the point?
or just like, it's about appeasing China, not wanting to upset China. It's like why?
Mm,
Now of course, China is I could see not see, but there might be more of an argument now because China is such an economic powerhouse now.
right.
But go back 20 years ago and before, and China wasn't, and yet it still had this policy of appeasing China, and it's always struck me as kind of strange in that regard.
Did you see when John Cena had to apologize for calling Taiwan a country?
Yes,
That was so awkward, wasn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's kind of like the unofficial policy not to recognize it as a country, or host any of their officials, but at the same time support their democracy. It's I don't know, it's a really weird thing. It's always struck me as odd.
Yeah. It's kind of like walking the fence a little bit, straddling the line.
So yeah, and to get back onto this, like being able to block meetings between the governor and any officials from China, from Taiwan, the governor they would still have to go along with that block to some degree.
Right. But, who knows how it was presented. When I
That's true.
first read it, I didn't necessarily think it would have been presented as we can't meet with them because we're going to upset China. We don't want to recognize them as a country or acknowledge their existence. It might have been some sabotage that. And again, I don't know this for a fact, but uh,
Right.
that's kind of how I read it. And I guess that was maybe an assumption, but I could see that, right? I could see if she was trying to stop the meetings from happening, because you don't want to out yourself or raise red flags, right? You don't want to be like, well, hold on, who are you to tell me the policy of New York is going to be we're not going to acknowledge Taiwan? I don't know if it was that obvious, right? It might have been a little bit more subtle than that, right? Like, we can't take this meeting for whatever. Oops, sorry, you have a conflict of interest, you have a scheduling conflict that day, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, imagining there's probably also some kind of conversation that takes place where, I mean, New York, especially New York City, has a pretty large population of people from China. Not just that were, not people that were born there that have, family in China, but people that have immigrated to the US and live there, especially with Chinatown, how big it is. And so maybe there's a conversation there, like we don't want to upset or alienate some of, our residents
Right.
here by these types of things because of that politics or whatnot.
It could be.
I'm sure there's a variety of things how it came about, but
It could be. I mean, I don't know. I'll have to read more into exactly what her role was in the administration,
right,
because obviously now the governors, Cuomo and Hochul, are trying to distance themselves from her and say, we don't, we really didn't have much to do with her. She wasn't very high level, whatever. So they're doing that probably because they don't want to get that heat on them. But
right.
if it's
Well,
true,
according,
if it's true that she really didn't have too much autonomy, especially not able to set policy, right? Who would she be to go to them and say you can't meet with these officials from this other country because it's going to upset China? I mean, that wouldn't be her role to say that. You know what I mean?
but in that article, that ABC News article, it said that the prosecutors said that she, at the request of Chinese officials, blocked representatives of the Taiwanese government from having access to high-level officials in New York State,
Mm-hmm.
altered state governmental messaging on issues related to the Chinese government, and attempted to facilitate a trip to China for a high-level politician in New York, among other things.
So altered messaging, and that phrase is a little vague. Also, what does that mean? Does it mean that
Right.
she was in a room convincing them to change it, or did she kind of sneak in and log into the
Right.
computer and change messaging when they weren't looking?
Right. Right.
So
So I'm sure it's going to all come out in court with their more specifics, but
right.
it does, like you said at the beginning, it does kind of raise some concerns about having these types of operatives or people that loyal to a foreign government in such high positions.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, now that you just said that, it reminds me of that topic we had not long ago on Nuance about spying on rival campaigns, right? Obviously,
Mm,
not the same thing, but of a similar nature, right? You're holding yourself out to be loyal, or someone who's trying to work for one person, but really you're trying to benefit a different party altogether. And in this case,
right.
a rival in many ways.
Right. Yeah. I wonder what kind of, if any kind of background research or vetting is done for people. I mean, I'm not sure what her position was, but to
Right.
have this kind of access to, I guess that she was an aide.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
wonder what,
and it's also funny in a sense that when we hear these words, right, spies or foreign operatives or whatever, I think our tendency is to reduce it to something you would see in a movie, right?
right,
Make it so overly dramatic, and she's a double agent and all that kind of stuff. But there could be some nuance in there. It could be not something that's even detectable by a background search. It could be some,
right.
she could just be a regular person going on living her life and going to school here and getting jobs here and working in government. There'll be no reason necessarily to think anything was wrong until the
Right.
activity started to occur. Right now, maybe there might have been something to find with her husband's business interest in China, and I don't know how long that was going on. I mean, that could have been something that would have raised suspicions. I don't know, but
And should that have raised suspicions?
but generally speaking, you may not be able to detect that, right? I mean, they could be
Right.
living their life as a regular person with no red flags.
Right. Should his connections or business interests in China, which is generally I don't know, a somewhat hostile government to the United
Mhm.
States, should that have been cause for concern or further scrutiny?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the nature of the business was and a lot
But
of
just,
factors, you know.
yeah.
But probably, I mean, it's probably worth looking at least, right? But then it's also her husband's business. So, I'm trying to think from the perspective of someone who's worked in government before. Now, I'm not married, but I don't really know how closely your spouse gets scrutinized when you go for a job.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Um, are they going to run background checks on your whole family? Probably not.
But we're talking about national security. We're talking about high level government
Yeah.
positions here. Now, according to the article, a spokesman for Cuomo said that she had little to no interaction with the governor. She was a low-level community liaison.
Mm-hmm.
However, when she, I guess, got to Hochul's administration, she was promoted to deputy chief of staff.
And we said, was she running the Department of Labor? Was she considered high up in the department most recently? I know they said she was fired last year.
I don't see that. They said that she was hired by the executive chamber more than a decade ago. They terminated her employment in March 2023 after discovering this evidence of misconduct. Um,
That's another question. I saw that also, and they're keeping that vague too. Discovering evidence of misconduct, but was it related
right,
to this? And if so, was that not reported earlier, or
right,
was it reported and that's why the indictment came down? But then it took what, a year and a half for that to happen? I mean, it does raise a question for me. If you
right,
discover this, why not say anything?
right. So it looks like, at least from the statement, for when working with Cuomo's administration, she wasn't really in that big of a position. She was, it said she was one of many community liaisons,
Yeah,
but for Hochul's administration, she was her deputy chief of staff. Or yeah.
yeah.
So
But you
that's
also don't know. I mean, obviously, deputy chief of staff is pretty high, but you don't know for Cuomo, for example, really what the relationship was because they're
right.
going to try to
Sure.
make it seem like she was a nobody because they don't want anyone to think that they were involved in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
So,
obviously they have a stake in this, right? You got to take that
right.
into consideration when you look at their statements.
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, this will definitely have to come out in court to see how extensive it was. But it is, it is concerning to say the least, that, and not just that
Yeah.
the Chinese government, but for any foreign government to have someone influencing
Right.
um,
Right.
American politicians on behalf of or to the benefit of these foreign governments.
And how, right? That's also what I would be curious to know. And that's probably useful in terms of guiding your policy or your procedures going forward, right? How
Right.
did this happen? Was it through the husband's business? I'm really curious to know
Right.
what the origin of all this was. How did the Chinese government even get in touch to say, we want you doing this?
Right.
You know?
So, yeah, we have to figure that out. So I don't think
Yeah.
any of them should be, influenced by foreign governments. I mean,
Right.
Israel's another one. There's a lot of influence
Yeah.
from
And
that foreign government.
right. And when we think of foreign countries, we tend to think of the federal government, right? In the US.
Right.
I think
Right.
it's a good reminder that state governments can be involved as well,
Yeah.
especially if you take something like New York, right? I kind of learned this. I mean, of course, you know it intuitively, but you don't really appreciate the scope and the extent of it until you get there, right? Working in Albany, you start to see, all right, you think that this is a state level job and this can be working on state law, but it's New York. It's where, for example, JFK Airport is, where a lot of the ports are.
One of the
It's
major financial hubs for the world.
right. Wall Street, big economic driver of the whole country and the whole world. And so there is foreign interest involved in this. And you start
Yeah.
to look at the history of the New York state government working to end apartheid, for example, in South Africa when that was going on, and throughout the
Right.
years. I mean, just because it's state government doesn't mean that there's no interaction or
Right.
relevance to foreign powers. There certainly is, right?
Or no interest from foreign powers to have some kind of a hand,
Right. Right.
in the dealings going on there.
Yeah, think about that, right? So now you're talking about allegedly China saying we want to get involved not just in what goes on in DC, but we don't even want the governor of New York or New York state officials meeting with these Taiwanese officials, right? So
Right.
that's really meddling at a deep level.
Right. Absolutely. So,
And then if that's going on, you just question about where else is it happening? What other states are, to what extent is it happening in DC? Because if they're, if they're going to go to that extent in New York, how far are they willing to go in Washington?
right. Absolutely. So this will have to come out in the court.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we'll see. So far it's the kind of light on information. So yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. This just broke today.
Yeah.
Um,
All right.
yeah. We'll have to keep an eye on it like there's other things. And like we said, this is all alleged right now, right? This is just what the indictment is saying, but
Right.
something to keep an eye on.